So we have an amazing panel chaired by Mark Jenkinson, who's the chair of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry Environment, Sustainability and Green Growth, or ESGG committee, as well as having had a long 25-year career with Siemens. And Siemens it was who built the Crystal Building, you may know, which now houses the Mayor of London and the GLA. Please allow me to set some context for this webinar. So I'm David Randall from Crystallizer. Crystallizer is a cooperative society that was set up by businesses really to be a bridge into the supply chain for community wealth building. So community wealth building is our mission. And we work with the local anchor institutions across South London to develop the local economy. Our sponsors on this webinar are the South East Net Zero Hub and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And our partners are the South London Partnership and the local authorities, some of whom are represented here today. So the South London Partnership has built an amazing site called retrofitskills.org, which I commend to you all. There's also a follow-up event, which you should know about. Sorry, somebody needs to go on mute, I think. There's a follow-up event taking place on the 14th of May at AFC Wimbledon, which I also commend to you. It's called the Retrofit Skills Summit, and we can put information about that in the chat as well. So that's the words of introduction. Mark, I'd like to hand over to you to chair the rest of the event.
Great, thank you, and thanks all. And yeah, so Mark Jenkinson, as David said, and thanks David for organising and inviting me to do the easy job. But just to expand slightly here, so I'm involved in the London Chamber, actually writing or putting together a couple of guides around the topic of retrofit, green skills, and finance. So this is hopefully a lot of stuff from today we can actually feed into those two guides. So I'm really interested to hear from the speakers. I'm also involved, I'm on the board of the South East London Chamber of Commerce, and we recently held an event in Greenwich, the Green in Greenwich Summit. And again, energy efficiency, retrofit, skills, and funding was a key focus for that as well. So again, we're really kind of keen to hear more about that. And the South East London Chamber also covers part of South London, including Croydon. So again, there's kind of ties in there. But I also involved, and I can see a few people in the participants involved in Tech London Advocates, and again, big focus around prop tech. So basically, technology to enable some of the retrofits that go on in some of our homes, and again, some of the things which we'll hear from Ben and co. And when I'm not doing all that, I have my own little business called Crystal Associates, which is named after the Crystal, which is now City Hall. Not to be confused with Crystallizer, but obviously I met David at an event recently, and it was a match made in heaven because our names are almost the same, I suppose. So that works very well. And I guess just one more thing before I hand over to our expert speakers is went to Innovation Zero, which again I think probably some of you were at this week, and just some stats which I'm sure we'll hear repeated throughout the session. But we all know that we've got quite a rich and varied housing stock in the UK, with the 29 million homes, as well as I know the focus today is South London, but this is the same across London and beyond. Almost 40% of our homes are built before 1939, which I'm sure you know some of these. And I guess a big issue that means is that over 2.5 million households across the UK are living in fuel poverty. So as well as obviously trying to reduce our fuel bills and have nice places to live, clearly this has also a real negative impact on people's lives. And 10,000 deaths in 2019 were linked to cold homes alone. So this is a really important topic. And unfortunately, since 2012, 95% decline in installation of domestic energy efficiency measures. And these are figures from the Federation of Master Builders. So basically, we need to do something. We need to retrofit quickly, and even in the wider London, we need to retrofit 2.2 million homes by 2030. So we need two things to do that, really, is skills, and we need some money to do it. So I don't know whether Howard Johns has joined us just yet. So we have to skip Howard for now and move over to Ben. But just to reiterate, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. Each of the speakers is going to have about 10 minutes each to give their perspective, and we'll come to the Q&A at the end. And then obviously at the very, very end, we have a quiz. And there's an opportunity for, I think, up to 6 people to win a free consultancy from Shiv, who's also on the call. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ben. And by the way, please keep yourselves on mute. But obviously, when we get to the Q&A, we can maybe start to ask some of you to pose some of your questions live. So Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. Great to be here. I'm Ben Schuldenfrei, one of the co-founders of Facted. So we are retrofit financing for landlords. And I'll tell you about my story. So I'm not a big portfolio landlord. I just have one flat, which I used to live in, and wasn't able to sell it when I went to buy my next family home. So I became a landlord. I'm an accidental landlord. And at the time, the EPC regulations, the minimum energy efficiency standards, was a big topic. My flat needed to be an EPC C at the time by 2025. So I was looking into improving the EPC rating and looking at some measures to improve energy efficiency. And I had some quotes for putting in double glazed windows because it's a terrace property in Kensal Rise, so not South London, but North London. But the quote for put in double glazing and to put in some loft insulation came to around £10,000, and I didn't have it to hand. And even if I did have it to hand, I didn't want to get rid, put all of that away up front and completely wipe myself out. So I went to my existing mortgage lender. I had some room in the LTV. I wasn't at the 75% cap, and I wanted to release some equity so I could pay for these energy efficiency works. And they said, very well, just tell us what's changed in your personal circumstances since we last spoke when you took out the mortgage with us. And I said, it was quite a big thing. I'd had a child born, and instead of wishing me congratulations, they actually said to me, well, that's a financial dependent. Your household income has remained the same, but you now got a financial burden effectively. So you don't pass the affordability, we can't give you any more money. And that was when rates were at 2%. And I was looking at the £10,000, it would have cost me about £20 a month in extra interest. So they wouldn't give me £10,000 because they didn't think I could come up with an extra £20 a month. So I realized there's a massive problem here. So we have millions of properties across the UK and millions of landlords who need to put in £10,000 on average. So that's the figure to get to an EPCC. It's going to cost £10,000 roughly. And existing mortgage lenders, they're not able to serve everyone. And personal loans also not able to serve everyone, particularly those with thin files or landlords who might already have 1 or 2 personal loans. It's not easy to get a third one, and it's also not in the landlord's appetite to take on that kind of borrowing. So I decided to create a business which allows landlords to fund retrofitting out of their future rental income from their rental property. So we started the business at the beginning of 2023. So we're about a year and a half into our journey. It's myself and a co-founder. I've got fintech experience working at fintech startups and management consulting. And my co-founder comes from a prop tech background. He worked at Matterport, which you might have heard of. It's the virtual tour company. It blew up during COVID, where all viewings weren't, it was illegal to do in-person viewings. So essentially, it was this virtual tour of a property using these really cool smart cameras on tripods. So that's us. We've secured a financing facility, so we actually have the money to give to landlords. That's not a problem. and that's with a family office who we have a close relationship with. Our financing is on the shorter term, so it's 12 to 18 months typically, which is a good thing because the longer term alone, it means you pay more interest. So, for an example, with a 40-year mortgage on just even a 2 or 3% interest rate, which you can't get anymore, but just using that as a low number, you end up paying about twice what you borrow over the 40 years. So, if it's a £300,000 mortgage, you actually end up paying £600,000 back. And that's because it's a 40-year term. Our financing 12 to 18 months and it's done, completely paid off. And our rates are competitive with other non-bank lenders and bridging finance in the region of 1 to 1.5% a month. And to date, we've originated £250,000. So that's gone to roughly 35 landlords so far in the last 4 months, allowing them to improve the energy efficiencies of their properties. So what I'd my ask from the audience on this webinar is, if you're involved in retrofit, and I know a lot of you are in any capacity, whether you're installers or suppliers yourself, or you work with installers and suppliers, we would love to talk to you, because we are going for a distribution through partnerships channel. So we're already working with councils and with smart water tank providers, solar panels, internal wall insulation is another partnership we have. So we essentially want to become the embedded financing option for landlord retrofit, but going forward, we have ambitions to help all homeowners as well, not just the landlords, but anyone who owns a property, because there is this massive need to decarbonize. We have, as a country, we're legally locked in to hit net zero by 2050, and something needs to change. And the built environment is contributing something like 40% of the UK's emissions, and the average property in the UK emits 6 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. That's that's 6 white rhinos, to put it in perspective. It's a very heavy number, and that's from millions of properties across the UK, 8.7 million rental properties and 20 million plus normal properties in total. So it's a massive problem. It's going to cost a lot of money, billions and billions, tens of billions of pounds, and we all need to work together to plug the financing gap, which is why I'm speaking on this panel. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. And please keep posting things into the chat and questions. And thanks, Fiona. So we all need to go to the Kingston's Efficient Home Show. So let's pass over to, I don't think Howard Johns has arrived yet. So pass over to Councillor Mark Benyon. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Councillor Mark Bainan, one of those pesky politicians you keep hearing about. Today, I've been asked by David just to talk a bit about the council and government role in all of this. So I'm actually, I'm still currently the chair of the pension fund at the council, and as part of that, I've been involved in a lot of working kind of looking at where we're invested, and so looking at sustainable investment and the climate emergency, and looking at kind of greener investments for the future, not just to hopefully protect the investments in the long term, and also in terms of tackling the climate emergency that we all face. So as I say, I've been asked to put in a bit of presentation about what the government and the councils are doing. I mean, the short answer is probably not enough. Like local government particularly is, as we probably hear, strapped for cash. But I've had a look, and I can hopefully give you some ideas about what is available, and what some of the challenges are. So hopefully you can see the presentation. I'm sharing my screen. Is that right? Does everyone see the? Yes, getting some nods. Yeah. Great. Okay. So this has already been plugged quite a lot, which is great. The Efficient Homes show Saturday, the 18th of May. You can see the details in the chat, so I don't need to post that on your screens, but you can, please do, if you're interested, sign up online, get your ticket. It's going to be, very useful, I think, an interesting day. We've got over 30 representatives from different organizations are going to be there. I see Crystal Liza are going to be there. There's going to be Sarah Olney is going to give a talk, the MP for Richmond. We'll have people, representatives from various retrofit companies, lots of charities, university, police, so all sorts of people coming, bringing all different angles and expertise. So that will be a great event. Please do sign up. In terms of what schemes are available to people then from government, it has to a degree be scaled back a bit. It's not quite as generous as it was a few years ago, but one of the main ones, kind of put them into together really, is government does provide incentives. They provide grants to energy companies, so it's going through the private sector, whereby if you fit certain criteria, as you can see on there, so if you're a certain age, have long-term health conditions or on benefits, or if the local authority deems you to be in fuel poverty, and we've heard there's a lot of people who are in that situation, then potentially you can benefit from grants, subsidies, and private companies, energy companies will come in to help make changes to your property to improve the kind of the energy efficiency of your property. So when we get people coming to us as a council, we often refer them, I'll skip ahead quickly, refer them to this website, which is very useful. It's the Energy Advice London website. I will just put that in the chat, so you can get quite a lot of information about all the resources available, help available on that site. So I'm just going to pop that in the chat if I can work it out. I'll carry on trying to, I will do that later. I'm just sharing my screen and posting on the chat. That's something I don't think I can work out straight away, but I will provide this information to you later. So that's one of the schemes. A lot of the schemes are targeted to people on certain, lower incomes or with certain health conditions. There is one. So there's a you might have heard of boiler upgrade scheme. So heat pumps. You've been in the news a lot.
Come on, Britty, off you get.
Oh, I think someone might need to put themselves on mute, unless they're telling that was aimed at me. There's a boiler upgrade scheme whereby all you need to be eligible for this is to own your home at home and have a fossil fuel heating system. And as you see there, there's fairly substantial grants made available to you to upgrade your boiler system to get something that's more energy efficient. So that's worth looking into if you think you can qualify. There's some information here. Again, I'll try and post these links a bit later on, but we do have our own on the council website, some information, links to these various schemes and the help that is available through the council website. I've mentioned the energy advice guide. There's another council run scheme is the Warm Home Better Health free assessment scheme. Again, this is something that is kind of means tested. It's for people with, over a certain age or have, particular severe health conditions. But what you can is a free assessment. So we work with Warm Home Better Health, which is a not-for-profit charity organization, and they will come round to your home and give you a free assessment and give you some, potentially provide some free low energy bulbs, radiator reflector panels, and a lot of advice and help around how you can improve the energy efficiency for your home. So there are some schemes available. We also have very small pots of money we get from various organizations and local governments to make changes to the local housing, the social housing stock. But really, I think the big problem is, it's a lack of kind of resources around local government, generally competing resources, and it's hard for local government to have this. We need to really kind of scale this up, and that's going to take central government, a lot of work and concerted effort to really have a coordinated, joined up approach to scaling these up to really make a difference to the housing stock in the UK. At the moment, it's all a bit scattergun. There's lots of pots here and there, but it doesn't seem to be as coordinated as it could be. obviously, well, potentially change of government, later on in the year. I mean, they've talked a lot about the money they're going to be put forward to the green economy, but that's kind of been scaled back a little bit. So we'll have to wait and see what, if that happens and what that means for the future, and the climate change activities that are going to be taking place. And I think, we just need, well, it'd be like, these events are great, greater education, greater understanding about what is available, even without, government support, incentives or grants. There are big savings to be had to individuals by investing in this technology and by making these small changes, and they can really, people don't, forking up a bit of cash up front, especially in the cost of living crisis, is a big ask. But if people can be educated and understand what's available, what the benefits are, it could really help, make people make better choices. I get better choices, more informed choices about what they can be doing to improve the efficiency of their homes and save money in the long run as well. There's some, I don't know, maybe I don't know if I'll speak to David, see if we can share this. Just a few kind of resources, kind of websites, government linked, council linked websites to various different organizations that can help provide information about what's available to individuals. So thank you. That's kind of all my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the activity in the chat. I guess there are lots of events going on as well, which is good to promote those. And and also obviously, please keep your any questions coming in. So I guess last but not least for this bit is David from Handelsbanken.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'll pull my my slides up on screen. If somebody could let me know when they could see them, I'd be really grateful. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah.
They're up. Excellent. So my name's David Fish. I'm the branch sustainability manager of Handelsbanken in the UK. So I have a national role, although for those of you familiar with Handelsbanken, you'll know that a big part of our proposition is to have very strong local relationships. And so our branch asked me to pop onto the call and sort of give a bit of background about Handelsbanken. For those that don't know us, however, we're a Swedish bank by origin. We've been in operation for over 150 years, and in the UK since the early 1980s. We have a slightly different model. Long-term relationships are really important to us. In fact, long-term in general is really important to us. Hence, building sustainability into our overall strategy was incredibly important to us. And it's interesting to hear some of the other panel members' discussions, particularly around financing with sort of traditional banks. I mean, we are a traditional bank, but and certainly some of the issues resonate with me in terms of how we might assess things. But what I've tried to do in my presentation to you is really keep this sort of non-Handelsbanken specific. This isn't a sales pitch for us by any stretch of the imagination, but trying to give a bit of a more sort of bank-led view on sort of where things are and how I think we can work with some of the other panel members in terms of providing support. So most of what we do is lending around property. We've got a lot of landlords that we support, but also we provide personal mortgages as well. So just for those that don't know, so two types of sustainable financing that we tend to see, which is use of proceeds, a specific investment. It's sort of the more traditional green investments around a specific property or a specific green purpose, but also for sort of large corporate space at the moment in particular. We can provide sustainability-linked loans linked around key performance indicators, so an intention to sort of move a business or a strategy in a certain direction, and we can provide financing around that. But most of what we see sort of from our branches tends to be a use of proceeds where, and I think that is fairly typical, where a customer has a very specific qualifying use or of funds or a specific property that they want to lend against. And I think generally as a sector, and trying to keep this non-Handelsbanken specific, there's an increasing awareness, I would say, around traditional banks for looking to move our own net zero transition through decarbonising our lending books and having an appetite for green lending and sort of reducing our emissions through the properties that we finance. So there's a move in this direction, but I think and where this sort of forum is extremely interesting to me is I think we typically feel some of the issues that have been mentioned already. So a little bit of a concern around advice. What is the right offering for a specific property? Are the skills there available to actually retrofit the properties that are available? And us and sort of the fintechs, the financing is because it is fairly embryonic and relatively new. It's not as sort of front of mind in terms of a lot of customers in terms of how they access green financing and sustainable financing to support their projects. So all of those aspects is leading to sort of inertia in the marketplace. So what we're typically seeing is a retrofit discussion, and where I think banks have a huge role to play is a little bit of advice and signposting. So I don't underestimate the value of this sort of seminar in sort of being able to contribute, but also taking away things that we can share, because there is no sort of one-stop shop really for a lot of clients in terms of who should they go to try and navigate the investment decisions that they've got to make. So Energy Saving Trust is something that we point to as well. UK Greener Buildings Council, of which we're a member as well, hugely beneficial resources in terms of retrofits. And increasingly, we're seeing a number of lenders look at bespoke tools, so customers can start to play around with their specific property and start to get a sort of a more digital understanding of the work that they can do. It's really quite often hard to know what is the right solution for each property. And as I say, that tends to lead to inertia in the marketplace. A couple of the panelists have already mentioned grants and discounts. It's sort of obviously a good first port of call. I know that this is very specific to London, but my role is sort of a national one, and I suppose some of the frustration that I see a little bit is some of those grants and discounts are not applied sort of equally across the UK. So it's sometimes, again, difficult to navigate, particularly when you've got more complicated landlords that might have properties in multiple geographies. It's sometimes a bit of a challenge to understand what might be available by way of support or grants for them. It's already been mentioned, a lot of those are focused on lower income households, and I completely understand that. I was at National Retrofit Conference a month or two ago, and heard a number of the panelists mention that for particularly the poorer quality housing, for every £1 spent on retrofitting a property, reduces cost of the NHS by around £4. So there's a real sort of social, tangible benefit to the retrofit conversation. From our perspective, a lot of what we tend to see is customers bringing us qualifying property either through a regulated mortgage or a buy-to-let transaction. What's more difficult, and I think Ben touched on it in terms of sort of where the traditional funding is sort of harder to quantify, is that transition funding, is that investment into a property that is going to have a return on investment either in the capital value or in cost savings for that property in terms of energy efficiency, and that part of that is some of the data is a bit patchy. Not everybody has metered data and so forth. Some of that is part of that is I think it's still quite embryonic, and we haven't necessarily got the got the look back data, but on which to sort of base a lending decision. So I expect that will get a bit easier over time, but it is quite difficult. There are some really innovative lenders. And part of what we do at Handelsbanken, I think, is point to best advice, really. So just because it's not right for Handelsbanken doesn't mean we can't signpost. So seeing some really interesting work, particularly in the mortgage space, around lenders able to ratchet pricing with EPC improvements. So if you're doing a deep retrofit and you can improve the EPC significantly, then you're going to get a pricing discount at the end of it once you can provide a relevant EPC certificate. And I think that sort of move and that sort of competition in the market can only be welcomed in terms of the overall ambition that should be placed on sort of lenders, and has been placed on lenders by our regulators to support that decarbonisation effort. So, unfortunately, it's sometimes difficult to find. The more, I've seen Nationwide, for example, who are more focused on sort of that smaller retrofit, I think, where you've got an interest-free element to the lending proposition. But if you're looking to do a deep retrofit or a retrofit on a significant property, some of that transition funding can be a little bit harder to find. How to fund significant retrofits. So I think we've got a really interesting period ahead of us, 12 or 18 months, as the Bank of England might start to look to reduce interest rates. I think there's probably a window of opportunity that is in front of us, where particularly for larger portfolios, landlords, where potentially they've had to adjust their cash flows to accommodate increased debt service. Actually, some of that might ease off, and I think we've all got a role to play to encourage those in that position, to where they are freeing up cash flow, to look at retrofitting properties and improving their energy efficiency. So there is that embryonic understanding of payback periods, and I think for sure at the moment you can make a case in a lot of situations where that return on investment is above the cost of funding, but it is still embryonic. So it's really interesting to hear a fintech on this panel, because I think the emergence of fintechs and tertiary lenders in that space is really, really important to help drive that retrofit ambition. So that's all I got to say on it. But very interested to be part of the panel, and look forward to hearing from the other panel members as we go, and of course your questions as they come. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Thank you, David. And last but not least, going to hand over to Howard. But again, thanks for the questions that are coming through about things like uptake, which could be my question. But next steps, and is there an incentive, and kind of is there a premium for doing retrofit? So I guess things to kind of think about after Howard has done his bit. So over to you, Howard.
Morning all. Sorry, I've missed the other speakers. So I will probably cover loads of stuff that's already been covered. So apologies. Classic clashing workshops today, one with Nesta on this very topic of how you get engagement and get streets to retrofit. So my name's Howard Johns. I'm founder of a company called 10 Energy. We're focused on how we speed up retrofit in the UK. We're focused on very tight geographic communities, working with homeowners with similar house types to package up and simplify the retrofit process. Because I think finance is one of the barriers, but there's actually probably 3 or 4 others that for someone who possibly is not even thinking about this stuff, for a homeowner, they're going to have to overcome before they even get to the finance conversation. So the first is, what is a retrofit? We talk a lot about fabric first. I guess I'm of the opinion that actually there's a huge barrier in talking about fabric first, because if we go deep retrofit, whole home approach, we're not going to be able to finance it. Simple as that. The things that pay back in this stuff, the measures that create the biggest savings are the ones we've got to focus on, because they're the ones that are going to actually be able to finance these packages of measures from. So many people talking about fabric first. Personally, I think we should be focused on what pays back the quickest, what's making the biggest savings for consumers, because that way the financing required is going to run for less time, etc., etc. Other challenges around this is working out what they can do and who can do it for them. So with 1.0, we've been basically trying to look at homes, offer up a standard package of stuff, be that solar batteries, insulation, heat pumps, and then basically using local trades that we're supporting to actually deliver it. Obviously, there's a whole load of challenges in this space around enough qualified tradespeople, quality of work, longevity of the projects, all that sort of stuff, which are also huge barriers for people taking these measures up. So at the moment, I think that you've got a very fragmented landscape, both on the advice on what's possible, who can deliver it, but then also financing. I guess what I see at the moment is that there are a few options available for people. Some you've already touched on that, David, around mortgages. Obviously, people can self-fund. That's going to be probably the best thing that they can do. Second best, I would say, cheapest form of capital at the moment is mortgages. And I would be amazed if we don't see a whole upswelling of different products from different mortgage providers. Obviously, you've referenced Nationwide, their £15,000 0% mortgage upgrade for energy efficiency work. When you look into why they're offering that, there's probably 3 or 4 reasons that are driving the bank to make that offer. One is obviously ESG requirements on banks to decarbonize their debt books. Second is that they don't know how to do it. So providing free money to do it is actually a really good stimulator of this market. Thirdly, they know that if you do this stuff and you get an EPC band jump, then you're going to add 10 to 15,000 pounds to the value of the property. So effectively, anything they're loaning against these measures will liberate an increased valuation for the asset they're lending to. And thirdly, obviously, they're aware that the cash flows that are coming off these projects should actually pay for the increased borrowing anyway. I think there's a bunch of work to be done to streamline the process of mortgage loans. We have actually assisted some of our clients to use the Nationwide mortgage upgrade, but I think there's a real opportunity to make that much easier at the moment. I think the clients have had to go through 3 Zoom calls and a whole load of paperwork to get that financing in place. Whereas, with an unsecured personal loan, they could have probably done it in 25 minutes on a web portal. So it seems mad that, a bank that's already got the relationship with this customer, already knows their credit score and all that sort of stuff, has got such onerous sort of process to go through to actually approve extra borrowing. I think there's a big gap for funding in this market. I think if we were talking about policy, what I'd like to see is government stepping in, not with loads of grants and loads of capital on the public balance sheet, but is actually a smart mechanism for underwriting risk for funders or reducing interest rates. So if government could do what's been done in Germany for, I think, the last 15 years, KfW Bank in Germany was able to loan to homeowners to retrofit their homes at something like 2%. And that, I think, would be transformative. And then commercial players could come in and actually wrap up offers to homeowners that were potentially unsecured, that could be on, let's say, a subscription basis. Already we're seeing this in the heat pump space and in the solar space. So companies have offered, have launched subscription-based finance products around home energy retrofit aspects. No one's done it for the whole thing yet. But the general idea is that you can do this stuff with no money down or with no upfront capital, and with a monthly payment that is funded by the savings you're making on the measures. And if we just dig into that, when you're looking at retrofit, what actually provides that cash flow? So I'm afraid to say, if you're talking about a deep retrofit where you're going to do external wall insulation, triple glazing, all that sort of stuff, that will not provide the cash flow. Most of those measures take at least 20 years to pay for themselves, if not 40, because they're very, very capital intensive, slow to do, complex, that sort of stuff, and hard to sort of revolutionize in terms of scaling. Heat pumps, really, they're not actually going to provide the cash flow either. The most recent study I've seen is that you may get a 15% bill saving from switching to a heat pump if it's well sized, that sort of stuff, if you're using gas. So there's some cash flow coming off it, but the real thing that makes the saving here is insulation. So the cheaper forms of insulation, like loft insulation, it's amazing how many people still don't have 300 mils of insulation in their loft. And then solar and batteries. You know, effectively you can wipe someone's electricity bill pretty much off entirely with solar and batteries, and that's what can actually drive the uptake of these measures. Basically, is that cash flow. So I think we're a long way from having a market that consumer needs at this point, the consumers need to get any contagion and scale. But I think, well, certainly we're pretty clear what the problems are, and we're trying to sort of knock those down as we go. We're about to so we've launched in a couple of towns already. We're a very new company, although I've been in this space for sadly 25 years. Haven't seen the changes I wanted in that time, so trying again. But we're about to launch in Brighton, and there we're going to try and sign up 1,000 homeowners with a view to actually finding maybe 400 or 500 that can't finance it themselves, specifically so we can start the conversations with lenders. Because I think, you know, this is the work that needs to be done. Is okay, how can we create the best model for folks at this point with the different mechanisms that are already out there? So if anyone's got any ideas and wants to feed into how we could finance retrofitting a few hundred homes in Brighton in the next year, please do drop me a message. And thanks very much for having me on the call.
Well, thank you, Howard, and thank you all. We're going to now move into the Q&A, but I guess I think you've kind of touched on one of the questions, Howard, from Alfred, which I guess I'll pose to you, which is it further up the chat, but I just lost it now. It was, what is the best next step for anyone who needs to replace their combi boiler and live in a small house flat who don't have space or want to make space for a hot water tank?
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard. I mean, you can put in a heat pump and some sort of instantaneous hot water heater, but it's probably overkill. I think, you know, case by case with these things, it's so funny because if you're doing the electric things like electric upgrades like PV and battery, it's super easy to estimate that. But the heat stuff is really specific, and it needs very specific measurements and analysis for every home. So you can put in a very small hot water cylinder. You could put one that lies on its side that can go in a cupboard. There's a few things you could do, but essentially, if you're going to move to something like a heat pump, you're going to need to store hot water. So yeah, could be a challenge. But again, happy for you to ping me a message afterwards, and I can see if I can help.
Great, thanks, Howard. So yeah, I've noticed there are a couple of other questions, but I've noticed Livy Drake appears a few times in the chat, and also Barry. So I don't know whether Livy, whether your questions are now answered, or whether you wanted to just put forward your plight, but the issues you're facing as a landlord.
No, it's been answered. So thank you. I'll look into the options. So that's super helpful.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. And Barry, I think you've got a couple of ideas for solutions. If you're still there.
Yes, I am. Yeah. Hi, Mark. Yeah, thank you. Yes, in fact, we've just completed our proof of concept pilot here in Sheffield, where we've been able to lower costs of the overall install by about 40%. We've brought in basically nearer 3 dozen now into the scheme, just on a very limited one street basis. And we're now rolling those out. So as I say, we've a proof of concept. I want to say ask one question, just preparatory to that, Howard. I couldn't agree more. This is activity. This is lending that pays for itself if you get it right. And we've been modeling that and remodeling that and looking at that very closely. The biggest barrier isn't actually making that case. The biggest barrier remaining, in fact, we've been looking at the barriers and how to remove them. I won't go into that now. But the biggest barrier remaining for going forward, I believe, is making that making the not making the case itself, but conveying that effectively to the people who are going to make the decisions. So, on the one hand, the householder to whom it looks like magic, they're going to pay out, an amount of thousands of someone else's money, and it's going to make money for them, and pay for itself. Sounds like it's got to be dodgy, equally, I don't think actually the decision makers elsewhere have really woken up to this yet. Howard, my question really is for Howard and anyone else who wants to address that, maybe David as well. How can we change that? How can we do you agree that this is a barrier? And if so, how can we overcome it?
It's 100% a barrier, and I think this is exactly what I've set this company up to try and knock through. I think trust in the offer is very, very low, and it's really interesting because if you are thinking about putting solar on your house and you put solar into Google, you are going to be bombarded for the next 3 months with direct sales companies, just trying to sell your lead to different solar installers.
Yeah.
And you probably won't end up with a good integrated solution at the end of it. And I think that's so when people do dip their toe in the water, they get a very unpleasant experience. And I think how we build trust in a community is, again, this is something we've been doing in our pilots, trying to create forums where people can explore, can also hear from other people in the community who've already done stuff and can actually be handheld through the process. To some degree, because I think, the first barrier we have is, let's face it, you have a gas boiler industry that till about 2 weeks ago was lobbying to prevent themselves being required to sell more heat pumps. So we've had oodles of disinformation in the media about heat pumps, which is almost certainly funded by them in their attempt to lobby to stop this punitive changes being put on their industry, so we're up against a big barrier. And I think, how you create that conversation in a community where people do feel that they trust the way forward and then will go and explore, what's right for them in terms of the systems and also the finances. It's a really key bit that I don't think people are focusing on, but is absolutely essential to moving the needle on this stuff.
Yeah, Howard, I'm going to come in. I agree. I think there is also the other aspect that I would just say about that is almost there's a bit of inertia around when is the right time to do this, because the other thing that is often in the media is what is the next piece of technology, what is the next solution, is actually now the right time for me to invest. And although, and I know we've talked about, Howard, you mentioned payback periods, that some of these things can have a fairly lengthy one, but particularly for landlords where actually tenants might be asking for better energy efficiency. The unknown, of course, a little bit in landlords' minds is going to be, well, what are my tenants going to require in the future? What does that mean in terms of potential voids? What is that opportunity cost, if you like, of not acting now versus, is technology going to be better? I mean, you've mentioned just in that last presentation that you've been able to save 40% of the install costs. So straight away you're thinking, well, if I did that 12 months ago, actually versus 12 months in the future, is there going to be a cost saving at some point? So I think all of us have got a huge responsibility, and we've spoken about the skills gap as well. For those that are looking to close that skills gap, what we need is people to come in with a really professional mindset around selling holistically, selling the right solution, as opposed to solar is always the right solution, air source heat pump is always the right solution. It is a blend and it is a mix depending on the property and depending on budgets and what individuals are trying to do. So I think all of this is leading to just inertia, and we as professionals in the organisation and landlords in terms of sharing best practice around some of the things that they have been able to achieve, I think will help to educate people. But that constant future state of a better technology might be coming, or it might be cheaper in the future, is all being factored into to why customers might not do something sort of in the near term, despite the business case potentially being quite strong for doing so.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question, Barry. Yeah, I guess there was quite a lot of comments in the chat, and I'm just trying to keep up. But Sharon Young from South Thames mentioned about skills, and I've done some work recently with the local London groups, and also a little bit with South Thames about the green skills and providing the heat pump installers of the future. So definitely that was a barrier. But a question for Iona was also how much of a barrier is regulation? Now, I guess again that was directed at. I think it's your fault, Howard, for coming last. But all the questions seem
Recency.
to be directed at you. But I guess so. Iona mentioned what are the barriers about regulation, but also I guess a more technical question about cooling as well, which is obviously
yeah. So on planning, yes, it can be a barrier, particularly if you're in a conservation area. There's been some interesting developments in one London borough, which is it Chelsea, I think, have now they're in a conservation area, but they've actually made a special sort of exemption for things like solar PV sited in certain areas and heat pumps, so that people can do them, and I think window upgrades as well, which is really great. Otherwise, you end up, not only do you have to work out what the hell you can do, you then have to try and convince the planners to let you do it, which is another hurdle that, I mean, let's face it, we haven't got enough hours in the day to cope with all these hurdles, have we? Let's face it. So yes, planning can be an issue. I think there is quite a lot of areas where it's not, but it can be in those more sensitive areas. There was another, I mean, just on the skills thing. I mean, I think people talk about skills gap. In my experience, there isn't a skills gap. There's a market problem. We've got lots of tradespeople out there who would like to work in this space. We've just made the market too complex for them to play in, so they don't bother. Simple as that, And I think that's a failure of the businesses in the area, not actually making it easy enough for tradespeople to work. So, with our
Howard, can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
What do you mean by sort of how is it complex for people entering that market? Yeah. What have you seen?
Well, I mean, so for instance, to become a solar installer, you have to go through something called the MCS accreditation, which is a bit like a gas safe accreditation, but it's really onerous. It's really hard to do. So if you're average electrician, they'll probably never do it, because if they're only doing a couple of them a year, they're just not going to go through that, expensive, complex process to actually add that to their roster. They'll just stick to, rewiring houses. So, I think we've again, in the cautiousness around trying to create a sort of well-regulated industry, we've actually excluded the people we need to be able to work in the industry, which is quite mad. I mean, again, this is something we're trying to address with 1.0. So we're specifically taking electricians, roofers, plumbers, and those sorts who've never done this stuff, and just training them on very specific areas so that they can, and taking away that paperwork, all the regulatory stuff, and the design and supply chain issues, which again, your average electrician is never going to become a solar designer. They're not. Your average plumber struggles to do a heat loss calculation. So taking those bits away that actually don't fit with their business model and giving them the bit that they can do, which is the actual installation in a highly held way, then suddenly they're able to work in the space and keen.
I don't know, Mark, just on the planning, whether is it really easy in Kingston? And there may be, I guess, a kind of wider question back onto the finances. What is the uptake of? Well, there's lots of kind of financing and grants out there. What is the uptake we see, and how do you actually increase it?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yeah, certainly the first bit as well. And
yeah, in terms of planning, I think, I do sit on the planning committee actually. That is an area we're more. I think we try our best, to be whenever we get applications coming through in front of us. Actually, most of the ones that come to us in the planning committee are the larger scale probably so individual homes wouldn't be coming to us anyway. They'll be going directly to the offices. But generally, we're keen to ensure that they are maximizing the potential for using sustainable energy, renewable energy. We talk about charging things like having charging points for electric vehicles. So we've declared a climate emergency like a lot of other councils. So we are keen to try and facilitate that, make sure developers are making the most of the opportunities. It's an area I need to find out more about, and going into next year, that's definitely something we're always learning and always finding out more and making sure that we don't put obstacles in the way of developers. And so the second question was about uptake. I think the uptake. I think that's something an area we do. Yes, as been mentioned, there's a lot of schemes out there, but it's more coordination, better communication. I think that people aren't really aware. It's just getting people nudged. People might know there's something out there, but getting them to actually realise the benefits of taking advantage of these schemes. That's down to I think communication, and I think there's definitely a lot of work that can be done in that respect. And kind of working more better with the private sector as well, to get to improve the viability and visibility of these schemes is definitely something that we could all improve on, I think.
Right, I'm conscious of the time because we've got the big quiz coming up soon. So but I suppose from each of the panelists, I guess what is your one takeaway? What's the one message we all need to do to effectively try and take advantage of this finance and retrofit our homes and get to net zero by, well, Ben mentioned 2050, but we've got a target in London for 2030. Maybe start with you going first, David.
I don't mind coming from me. Just start. That is it doesn't. People talk about deep retrofit. Light retrofit. That there is always something that can be done. So just start. There is a lot of inertia out there, and it is a complex area, and I can see why people sort of just sat on the sidelines a little bit. But just start. That would be my one. There is help, there is support, there is finance, there is grants, but just start the transition, however small. Just take that first step.
Who wants to go next, Mark? And is there funding for window upgrades? Was one question that popped in.
Well, on that, sorry, specifically, I'm not sure. Not that I'm aware of, but there may. I don't know if anyone else has any more information, but that's not something specific. Well, having said that, they'll probably be part of any. So for the with the private sector funding, the government of kind of providing grants to kind of energy companies to come in and do retrofitting. That I'm sure that would be part of any potential solutions that would be put in place. But that's for the kind of generally speaking, households on lower incomes or with health needs. In terms of what, I'd just say, kind of echo what David would say. I mean, I just think we're talking about this today and finding out all the schemes available. I haven't really looked into my own home and doing anything about that. You've got to start thinking about your own home first, and then once you've done that, then you're in a better position to be telling others and you're understanding about what's available. So there you go. It's something for me to do myself, really. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ben. Your one thing?
Yeah. So my one thing it goes to landlords. So very likely we're going to have Labour in power as our next government, and you can bet your bottom dollar that they're going to put some pretty quick measures in place to get rental properties to sufficient EPC grades. A C, I'd say, would be the minimum, but likely to be a B very soon afterwards, and that's going to come in to force around 2030. I'd say would be the deadline, if not sooner. So my advice is just don't leave it until if you're a landlord and you want to be a long-term landlord and hold on to your properties, then start doing the work now, because if everyone waits until a year or two before the deadline, there aren't going to be enough installers to do all those properties. It's going to be physically impossible. So and even if it is possible, prices are going to go up because there's going to be so much demand at that time. So start as soon as you can in your retrofit journey is my advice.
And last but not least, Howard.
Thanks. I was actually with the Shadow Energy Secretary yesterday morning, the morning before, and they're planning 5 million home energy upgrades in their first term. So we are like to see some significant policy intervention, I think. But that makes me really fearful, because having been around grant-based policy for quite a few years, it's so often that they badly manage it that actually causes more harm to the industry than it does actually long-term futures. Anyway, but the specific takeaway I think people should I'd like to share is that we think for your average 3-bedroom house in most places in the UK, for a capital investment of about £21,000, you can deliver solar, batteries, a heat pump, loft and cavity wall insulation. Obviously, at the moment, there's a £7,500 grant for the heat pump. So for £12,500, you can deliver that package of measures, which will probably jump the house 2 EPC bands. So increase the value of the house by £20,000 to £30,000. It will also drop the running cost of the house by 50 to 60%. And the CO2 emissions, more importantly, to about 30% of what they currently are. And the final great thing about that package is that it can be delivered in 1 to 2 weeks. So none of this, okay, it's a year-long process of retrofitting your home. 1 to 2 weeks, in and out, nice and clean, local trades, and effectively you've got huge positive impact for the person in the home at the end of it. Again, many people don't realize the impact of gas on our communities. There's huge health implications of cooking with gas. Apparently, if you have a gas stove in your house, it's like living with a smoker. So in terms of the amount of air pollution that's coming into your space, these are conversations that we haven't been having. We need to be having them, because they're going to be a key driver for people as to why they might want to do this stuff. But yeah, agree with the rest of the panelists. There's no time like the present. So if you're thinking about it, just start, and I'm very happy to help if we can.
Perfect all. And thank you, panel. I really enjoyed it. And yes, there will be a kind of a report that comes from this. I think Nathan mentioned in the chat, but also obviously this will feed into the stuff we're doing for the London Chamber paper. And maybe it's a skills gap and a market problem. Maybe that's a title for the next webinar. Who knows? So I'll hand back over to David.
Thank you, Mark. That was amazing, and thank you, panelists. Really fantastic. I'd like to introduce Mr. Shiv Challa. Mr. Challa is a member of Crystallizer. He's also a sustainability consultant, and he's been in the construction industry for decades. And he's very generously agreed to provide some free home assessments and carbon footprint assessments as a prize to panelists. For attendees for attending, if they could get through the hurdle of answering the following questions. We might be generous and give prizes to the people with the top marks. Shiv, do you want to say a couple of words about what you're planning in terms of the free prizes?
Yes, as we said, we will give a voucher for 3 of the winners where I would help them to calculate their own carbon footprint, or their organization, if they are running an organization, free of cost, so that they can make their own net zero plan. And since David has asked me to talk, so we are part of Eco Workforce Partnership, and I've also posted in. We will be looking for a community-based retrofit program, which will be request for Mark, if we can come up with some sort of project together and showcase for Kingston. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, and thank you for your generosity. It's really much appreciated.